My vicious dogs attacked you? I am calling the police. Our HOA president shrieked into her phone, her voice echoing across the street as nearly 50 neighbors looked on. But something about this entire situation felt deeply off. When I brought my 2 Irish wolfhounds to this ranch in Texas, I never imagined I'd end up in a standoff with the neighborhood's HOA president. Carol insisted my gentle giants were a threat and demanded they be removed. Then something changed. Finn, my sweet, friendly boy who had never so much as growled at a Soula, started acting strangely around her property. And the night I caught her sneaking through my yard at midnight, everything took a sharp turn. What my dogs later uncovered in her secret shed would leave our entire neighborhood stunned. Drop a comment sharing your worst HOA experience. The Texas heat was already intense at 6 a.m. when I first met George, my neighbor. He was out front, watering his roses, trying to get ahead of the triple-digit scorch that was coming later. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he greeted, casting an approving look at my Irish wolfhounds. "That's Finn," I said, introducing him to the more energetic of the pair, and pointed to Cirsa, his sister, who was already lounging lazily on the grass. George looked to be in his late 60s, with the weathered skin of someone who'd spent a lifetime under the southern sun. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said, dropping his voice as he glanced down the street, "but a heads up, Carol, our HOA president, can be intense. She's been running the show for about 3 years now. In that time, 5 families have packed up and left. Just watch yourself, especially with those dogs." I appreciated the warning but brushed it off. I'd deliberately chosen this area because it was zoned R3 agricultural. I could legally keep livestock if I wanted. The HOA wasn't going to tell me my dogs were too large. Still, maybe I should have paid closer attention to how George's hands trembled slightly at the mention of Carol's name, or how his eyes nervously flicked toward the spotless white house sitting like a throne at the end of the street. But I was still settling in, still surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, still unaware of what was about to unfold. Finn, on the other hand, picked up on something immediately. My 150-pound gentle boy who had failed out of police dog training for being too friendly suddenly went on high alert. He faced the direction of that White House, his enormous head raised, and let out a low growl I'd never heard from him before. "Easy, buddy," I whispered. But he didn't stop. That's when I heard the quiet whir of an approaching golf cart. Nothing too suspicious at first, the kind of sound you'd expect from a leisurely game of golf. But George's reaction said otherwise. He dropped his watering can and stepped quickly toward his front door. "Good luck," he muttered, disappearing inside. Then the cart came into view and so did Carol. She looked to be in her 50s, dressed in a full blazer despite the rising morning heat. Her hair was perfectly styled in that rigid, no-nonsense suburban fashion. Clutched in one hand was a leather binder that I would later learn was her annotated, heavily personalized version of the HOA bylaws. The cart stopped right at the end of my driveway. She stepped out with the dramatic flair of someone who clearly enjoyed this role. Her eyes immediately locked onto Finn and Cirsa, and her expression twisted with what looked like equal parts fear and disgust. "Those dogs," she said coldly, skipping any introduction, "are in violation of Section 3.2.1 of the HOA bylaws." Her tone had that bossy edge of someone used to absolute compliance. "No animals over 35 pounds are permitted in this development," she added. I laughed. Probably not the wisest reaction. "Ma'am, I live on R3 agricultural land. I could keep horses here if I wanted. These dogs are completely legal." I reached for my phone to show her the listing, but she wasn't even looking at me anymore. Her eyes were fixed on Finn, who had stepped between us, growling again. Carol took a step back, and for a moment, I saw real panic flash in her eyes before it vanished into a simmering glare. "I don't care what your paperwork says," she spat. "I am the HOA president, and I decide what's appropriate for this neighborhood. Your trash cans are 6 inches too far from their assigned placement. That's a $200 fine." She pulled out a small digital camera and began snapping photos of every corner of my property like it was her full-time job. "Who even cleared your purchase of this house?" she asked sharply. "This is a family neighborhood, not some barnyard for oversized mutts." Finn's growl deepened, and to my surprise, even Cirsa got up and moved to stand beside him, alert, protective. Carol's gaze darted between the two of them, She gripped her bylaw binder like a shield. "The HOA doesn't tolerate disruption," she warned, backing toward her cart. "You'll learn that soon enough. I suggest you start looking for a more suitable place to live." She climbed back into her golf cart and sped off, but not before I caught her quickly snapping more photos with her phone. As the sound of her retreating engine faded, George's front door creaked open. "Still think it's nothing to worry about?" he asked. I was just about to respond when my phone buzzed. An email from the HOA, time-stamped exactly 11 p.m. the night before. It was a notice. $200 fine for excessive dog noise recorded at 10:47 p.m. Attached was a grainy photo of my house. Finn and Circe were sound asleep at my feet that entire evening. I zoomed in on the photo and felt my stomach drop. In the shadowy corner of the frame, hard to make out, but unmistakably there stood a figure. Someone was in my yard. I drew back the curtain and looked outside. There, under the moonlight, was Carol. In my backyard, holding something in her hand, and smiling directly at my security camera. What was she doing in my yard at midnight? Have you ever caught a neighbor doing something shady on camera? Let me know below. That night, sleep was impossible. Every little creak or rustle outside had me jumping out of bed to check the windows, half expecting to see her again. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. If she wanted to play this game, I'd be ready next time. The next day, I installed a full security system of 4 HD cameras with motion detection and night vision. The installer, a young tech with an air of experience, took one look at my situation and raised an eyebrow. "HOA issues?" he asked. When I nodded, he smirked knowingly. "Third one this month. That woman is something else." He didn't even have to say her name. As night fell, I was ready. My laptop streamed live feeds from every camera, and it didn't take long. At exactly 2 a.m., the motion alert pinged. There was Carol dressed head to toe in black, creeping along my fence like some sort of suburban ninja. In her hand was a plastic bag. I watched, stunned, as she tossed something over my fence. The next morning, I found the evidence: raw meat, laced according to my vet with industrial-grade laxatives. The attacks weren't just beginning, they were escalating. On the second night, Carol took things to a new level. She set up a speaker system just outside the edge of my property and began blasting loud recordings of barking dogs starting at 5 a.m. sharp. Naturally, my poor neighbors were frustrated and confused, assuming the noise was coming from Finn or Circe. But both of them had been fast asleep inside the entire time. By the third night, she escalated again, this time by spraying some noxious chemical along my fence line. The stench was overwhelming, and it disturbed my dogs so much they refused to go near that side of the yard for days. Each of her attacks was precise, carefully timed and placed just beyond my property line, technically keeping her from trespassing while still tormenting us. But what truly unsettled me wasn't just the harassment, it was how calculated everything felt. This wasn't the behavior of someone having a meltdown or experiencing a rough week. This was organized, intentional, strategic psychological warfare. So, I began compiling evidence. Every incident went into a growing file I was building, a one that would eventually prove essential. But I also needed to understand her. What kind of person does this, who dedicates their nights to tormenting neighbors over the size of a dog? That's when I stumbled across a hidden online community group for the neighborhood. It was locked behind privacy settings and required approval to access. Once inside, it was like opening Pandora's box, a timeline of complaints dating back 3 years, right around when Carol became HOA president. The posts were endless. Reports of stolen decorations, unexplained finds, and families who abruptly packed up and left with no word of why. But one thread in particular grabbed my attention: missing items 3 years and counting. The original poster's account had been deleted, but the replies remained. One comment read, "My mother's garden gnome vanished the day after we reported those strange noises at night." Another said, "Our antique bird bath disappeared the same week we were fined for grass being half an inch too tall." But then came the comment that sent chills down my spine: "Check the shed behind C's house." The post was 2 years old. The replies asking for more details, all unanswered. The user who posted it, also deleted. I was still deep in that thread when I heard a knock on my door the next morning. George stood there with 2 mugs of coffee and concern in his eyes. "Thought you might need this," he said gently. "You look like you haven't slept." I invited him in and showed him everything I'd found. His expression grew darker with each passing screenshot. When I finished, he sighed deeply. "I didn't want to get dragged into all this," he said quietly. "But since she's already targeted you, there's something you should know." He set his mug down, his hands trembling just slightly. "My wife's holy cross went missing 3 years ago. It had hung on our porch for 40 years. Gandhi right after we complained about Carol's late-night hoe parties. A week later, we were fined $300 for having a potted plant in a non-compliant color." He stood to leave, then hesitated at the door. "Be careful," he said in a low voice. "The last family that stood up to her, their dog disappeared. They were gone within a month." That night, I sat reviewing surveillance footage, organizing files, documenting everything. Then my phone buzzed an alert from the neighborhood forum. Someone had replied to that same old post about missing items. The user account was deleted. The message: "Stop digging, or your dogs will vanish like the others. This is your only warning." My hands were shaking as I captured a screenshot. Then my phone rang, an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. For a moment, there was only breathing on the line. Then came a voice, syrupy sweet and chillingly familiar. "Sweet dreams, neighbor. I hope you're not too attached to those lovely dogs of yours." It was Carol. And then the line went dead. I looked over at Finn and Cirsa, curled up peacefully by the fireplace, completely unaware of the danger closing in. That was the moment I made my decision. I wasn't going to be another silent victim. I wasn't going to run. Carol had crossed a line the moment she threatened my dogs, and now I was ready to fight back. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Call the cops or take matters into your own hands? 3 days passed without incident. Too quiet. That should have been my first clue. Carol was planning something, and when it finally happened, it was more dramatic than I ever imagined. I was working from home when I heard chaos erupt outside. Peeking through the window, I spotted Carol in her front yard, but something was off. Her usual polished look was gone. Her blazer was torn, and was that blood on her face? My security cameras captured every second, but I already knew that wouldn't matter for what came next. I watched in stunned silence as Carol pulled out her phone and dialed. I didn't have to hear the number say I knew she was calling 911. Her voice came shrill and panicked, the kind of theatrical performance that sounded almost too perfect. "Please send help. My neighbor's vicious dogs attacked me. I'm at 452 Oak Street." She was staring straight at my home as she spoke, and for just a second, I swear I saw her smirk. But the act wasn't over. With her free hand, she raised her phone and went live on the neighborhood's social media page. "Everyone, please," she wailed to the camera. "I'm being mauled by dangerous animals. They came after me for no reason." Neighbors began pouring out of their homes, many already recording her. It was pure manipulation, and she was executing it flawlessly. The masterstroke came when 3 men in identical black shirts arrived on the scene, claiming to be HOA security. They showed up before the actual police, which meant they had to be waiting nearby. We saw it all. One of them declared loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Those dogs charged right at Mrs. Carol. They're a danger to this entire neighborhood." I could see the crowd growing, phones pointed in every direction, and realized what was happening. I was being set up, and she'd probably done this before. Then came the sirens. 3 squad cars pulled up, lights flashing. The officer who stepped out first was Deputy Miller, ex-military, built like a tank, and not someone you'd want to lie to. He scanned the scene of Carol's injuries, the security team nodding solemnly, the crowd whispering. His jaw tightened as he made his way to my door. Inside, Finn and Cirsa were barking like crazy, pacing in confusion. Their noise only added fuel to Carol's narrative. "Sir," Miller said sternly when I answered, "we've received a report that your dogs attacked a neighbor. I need you to step outside." Behind him, Carol was being comforted by her so-called security team, as at least 15 neighbors looked on. "My dogs haven't even left the house today." I began to explain myself, but Deputy Miller raised his hand. "Sir, I need you to step outside. We'll sort this out, but I need your cooperation." With hands clearly visible, I stepped out onto the porch, trying to stay calm even though my thoughts were racing. I couldn't believe this was actually happening. Carol had executed her plan flawlessly. I was about to be blamed for something my dogs never did. All around, neighbors whispered and filmed, some still live streaming the spectacle. I caught fragments of their conversations. "Those dogs are massive." I knew they were dangerous. Poor Carol. It was a mob forming right in front of me and I was the one in the crosshairs. Then, out of nowhere, a lifeline appeared. George came running, actually running, despite his age, clutching his phone high in the air. Officer Miller, I've got video footage," he called, panting and red-faced but clearly determined. He reached us and leaned in, speaking quickly. I backed everything up to the cloud just in case. Miller looked doubtful, but still professional. "Sir, I'll need to see that." George pulled up the security footage, and we all gathered around to watch the truth unfold on his phone. There she was, Carola recorded in crystal clear high definition half an hour before her emergency call. The video showed her standing in her yard, calmly digging her nails into her own face, ripping her blazer in deliberate places, and even rolling on the ground to dirty her clothes. She paused to check her reflection in a compact mirror, adjusted a few scratches, and smiled, clearly pleased with her handiwork. The crowd fell completely silent. Someone finally broke the quiet with a stunned "Oh my God." Phones that had been recording me were now trained on her. Deputy Miller's expression shifted from disbelief to outrage. He turned to Carol. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "you're going to need to come with me. We need to have a conversation about filing a false police report." And just like that, her entire performance unraveled. The tears stopped. The hysteria faded. What replaced it was raw, unfiltered fury. "That video is fake," she shouted. "It's a deepfake. They're all conspiring against me. This is an attack on my authority." Her so-called security team suddenly looked eager to disappear, slowly retreating as though they'd never met her. The crowd was murmuring again, but this time, the energy had shifted entirely. "I always had a feeling about her," someone whispered, and not 5 minutes after they were ready to burn me at the stake. Deputy Miller didn't take the bait. He issued a stern warning about making false statements and wasting emergency resources, though he said an arrest wasn't possible without proof of deeper criminal intent. The police eventually cleared the scene, neighbors trickled back to their homes, and Carola left standing alone. She was suddenly without her backup, her lies, or her audience. But as everyone turned away, I noticed she wasn't looking at the police or the crowd. She was staring directly at George, and her lips moved in no sound, but I could read them as clearly as if she had shouted, "You're next." George had seen it too. His hands began to shake again. As we walked back toward our homes, he leaned in close and whispered, "Alexa Broken Bar, there's something I never told you. Something about the last people who stood up to her." He looked nervously toward Carol's house before continuing. "The Hendersons. Back in 2019, they had a German Shepherd, Bruno. Loyal, healthy, protective." He paused. "After they filed a complaint against Carol, their dog started acting sick. Then one day Broken Bar Bruno just disappeared. No broken fence, no signs of struggle. He was just gone. A week later, they packed up and left. It didn't even tell anyone. No for sale sign. Just left the keys and vanished." He glanced back again. "And Carol?" She smiled. "For weeks after they were gone." What do you think happened to the Hendersons? Leave your theory in the comments. You'd think exposing Carol's lie would have been a win, but it only opened the door to something darker. The finds started pouring in a daily, each more ridiculous than the last. $200 for lawn height exceeding the max by a quarter inch. $300 for unauthorized butterfly presence in my garden. Still not joking. $500 for canine intimidation of the community. Whatever that meant. The total climbed past $2,000 in a matter of days. My finances were taking a beating. Even neighbors who had seen Carol's outburst firsthand were now avoiding me, likely terrified of becoming her next victim. I found myself considering the unthinkably. Maybe it wasn't worth it. Maybe I should just move. But financially, it was a disaster. Selling now would cost me at least $50,000 in losses. Then again, staying meant dealing with a lunatic who had a pattern of making people and their dogs disappear. That's when George returned. This time, after dark, he showed up at 10 p.m., glass of bourbon in hand, clearly already deep into it. "I can't stay quiet anymore," he slurred, his tone grave. "The Hendersons were good people." He sank into my couch, eyes heavy with guilt and bourbon. Jim Henderson confronted Carol at an home meeting back in 19, accused her of embezzling funds. A week later, their dog started showing signs of illness. The vet was stumped. Then one morning Bruno was just gone. The gate was locked. No signs of a break-in, just a broken bar vanished. George took another sip, hands shaking. That night, they got a note under their door. This is what happens when you defy the HOA. They moved out within the week, sold the house for cash. No listing, they just a broken bar ran. He stood, slid a small slip of paper into my palm, and said only this: "Check behind her house." He left without another word. Armed with that mysterious note, and a surge of resolve, I decided to do a little reconnaissance. At 3 a.m., I took Finn out for a walk on public sidewalks. Of course but I stayed close to the edge of Carol's property, watching for anything unusual. What happened next confirmed everything George had told me. Every 50 feet or so, Finn would stop. He'd stare intently in the direction of Carol's backyard. His nose twitched, his ears perked, and then he'd let out that deep, guttural growl again. It wasn't threatening, it was alert. It was a warning. Finn's body remained rigid, tense and alert, as if he could sense something wasn't right. When we got back inside, I launched my drone, keeping it flying just within legal altitude but close enough to capture useful footage. What I saw made my stomach drop. Behind Carol's pristine, magazine-worthy home was a small shed at roughly 8 by 10 feet. But this wasn't your average garden shed. It was outfitted with industrial-grade locks that looked wildly excessive for lawn equipment. 2 security cameras were aimed right at it, and thick power cables ran from the main house to the shed. Why would anyone go to such extremes for what was supposedly just a tool shed? Things were starting to add up. I compiled a list of every missing item reported in the online group of the decorations, the bird baths, the heirlooms. All of them were preceded by some kind of confrontation with Carol or the HOA. The pattern was unmistakable. Challenge Carol's authority, get fined, lose something valuable. It had happened 23 times over 3 years. She wasn't just a stickler for roulette, she was a bully using the HOA as her weapon, punishing anyone who dared to question her. I spent the rest of the night digging into legal codes, municipal ordinances, and property law. If Carol wanted to play dirty through bureaucracy, I'd fight fire with fire. By morning, I had a strategy. Still, I nearly backed out. The stress, the money, the mental toll, it was mounting fast. I caught myself browsing real estate listings in other states, calculating how much I'd lose if I sold now. It was tempting. Quiet, clean, safe. I even started packing, and that's when Finn stopped me. He bit gently onto my sleeve and pulled firmly, but not aggressively. When I moved back toward the boxes, he did it again, this time letting out a soft, mournful whine that cut straight through me. Then he led me to the window facing Carol's property and sat down, eyes fixed forward, ears perked, completely alert. It was like he was saying, "We don't run from people like her." Sorka joined him. She was usually the picture of indifference, but now she was wide awake, standing tall beside her brother, looking at those 2 massive, loyal animals, dogs who wouldn't hurt a soul but were now labeled as threats. I felt something shift inside me. "Okay, boy," I whispered, stroking Finn's fur, "let's finish this." I sealed the envelope containing a formal property survey request, an entirely legal step that would trigger a full inspection of the land, property lines, and structures. A bureaucratic grenade Carol would never see coming. But just as I was getting ready to send it off the next morning, Finn started growling again, his warning tone. I glanced outside and saw a small package sitting on my doorstep. No sign of a delivery truck. Inside was a grimy leather dog collar, large enough to fit a German Shepherd. The tag had once held a phone number, but it had been violently scratched out. Underneath, in what looked alarmingly like blood, were the words, "He didn't listen either." My hands trembled as I photographed every angle. This wasn't just intimidation, it was an outright confession. Carol had all but admitted to harming Bruno, the Hendersons' dog, but it also meant something else. She was escalating. We were moving past veiled threats into dangerous territory. If the stories George told me were true, Carol was fully capable of following through. I stared at the survey letter. Mailing it would be crossing the Rubicon. Carol would know, without a doubt, that I was retaliating, and judging by her history, resistance wasn't something she handled well. Then I thought about everyone who'd been pushed out, the families who left quietly, the pets who never came back, the neighbors still afraid to look her in the eye. Someone had to take a stand. I drove to the post office and sent the letter via certified mail, with signature confirmation. There was no turning back now. The war had officially begun. Have you ever received a threat from an anonymous source? Drop your story in the comments and I read them all. The genius of a formal property survey request in a boundary dispute is that it's entirely legitimate, and once it's filed, it's a runaway train no one can stop. A friend of mine who works in county planning had explained it to me over coffee. Once it's submitted, it becomes part of public record, he said. The surveyor has to legally document every structure on every lot within the review area. Here's the best part. If they uncover any unpermitted structures during the inspection, they are legally obligated to report it to the city's building department. No wiggle room. No exceptions. And that shed? That fortress Carol built behind her house? It definitely wasn't original. I'd bet everything she never filed for the necessary permits. This wasn't just a survey, it was a countdown. 10 business days until everything blew up. Carol's reaction came sooner than expected. First, she tried to play it by the book, filed a complaint with the city claiming harassment. The city clerk called me in a bored voice, clearly going through the motions. Sir, we've received a complaint alleging that your property survey is an act of harassment. Care to comment? I kept it cool. I'm a new homeowner. I want to confirm property lines to avoid future disputes. A pause, then an audible sigh. Sounds reasonable. Complaint dismissed. Click. Round 1. Mine. But Carol wasn't done. She called an emergency home meeting. According to George, it was a total disaster. She tried to motion for my removal from the community, but she needed 2/3 support and barely got 3 hands raised. The viral video had shattered her credibility more than she realized. Stage 3, legal intimidation. A lawyer from Houston showed up at my door. Sharp suit, smug smile, reeked of expensive cologne and arrogance. Mr. Alex, he said, handing over his card. I represent Mrs. Carol and the HOA. We believe your survey request is frivolous and intended to harass. I smiled. That's odd. I thought confirming legal property boundaries was just responsible homeownership. He tried to push a few more angles, but when I showed him my zoning documents, the agricultural classification, and my rights as a property owner, his smirk faltered. A week later, George let me know the lawyer had dropped Carol, advised her not to proceed. That's when Carol hit desperation mode. She showed up on my doorstep at dusk, looking a broken bar human. No blazer, no hoe binder, just a woman with dark circles under her eyes, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Please, she's actually pleading, let's put this behind us. I'll drop every fine. I'll even pay you a $10,000 cash. Just take back the survey request. $10,000 over a garden shed. Carol, I said calmly, I just want to understand my property boundaries. If everything's above board, you've got nothing to worry about. Something flickered behind her eyes, a pure, burning hatred, just for a second, then gone. You don't understand what you're doing, she spat. This neighborhood needs order. It needs someone strong. Without me, everything falls apart. She was shaking now, whether from fury or fear. I couldn't tell. 20,000, she blurted out. 20 grand if you leave tonight. Take your dogs, pack your things, and I'll make sure you turn a profit on your way out. That offer said everything. Whatever was inside that shed was worth more to her than $20,000. I looked her dead in the eye. I'm not going anywhere, I said. The survey goes forward. Her transformation was instant. The desperation vanished. Her face twisted into something unrecognizable. You have no idea who you're messing with, she growled. I've controlled this neighborhood for 3 years. A broken bar I've handled worse than you and those mutts. Carol hissed, stepping closer. Her breath carried a sharp scent of possibly alcohol. Accidents happen, she said, her voice silky and sinister. Dogs slip out a broken bar, end up in traffic. Houses have wiring issues, a broken bar, fires start. Are you really going to gamble all that over a few lines on a map? I pulled out my phone and made an exaggerated show of checking the live feed from my security system. Carol, I said, steady, cold. That sounded an awful lot like a threat. Deputy Miller would love to hear it. She hesitated, the corner of her mouth twitching into a chilling grin. Prove it, she said, her voice now flat, before turning on her heel and disappearing into her house. The survey was scheduled for 3 days later, and you could feel the tension in the air like a storm ready to break. Everyone on the street knew something big was about to happen. Carol, normally ever present in the HOA golf cart or pruning her roses, had vanished behind shuttered windows and closed blinds. Her house was dark, silent, but I knew she was watching. The morning of the survey, the official team rolled in with a marked van and high-grade equipment. I watched from my front window, noting the moment Carol's curtains shifted ever so slightly. The surveyors were consummate professionals, measuring, photographing, logging every detail with calm precision. Carol finally emerged, tried to raise an objection, but the team lead showed her the stamped documents. Ma'am, this is a lawful survey. You're free to observe here, but interference isn't permitted. I watched as they reached the backyard. When they got to her shed, their demeanor shifted. The lead paused, took more photos, double-checked measurements, then pulled out his phone and stepped away to make a call. Something was wrong. When he returned, his face was all business, but his eyes were tight with concern. Mr. Alex, he said, we've identified an unpermitted structure approximately 8 by 10 feet, built without any city authorization, likely around 3 years ago. I nodded, but his voice dropped lower. There's more. He hesitated. Our equipment picked up some unusual metal readings beneath the shed. Large masses, possibly piping or wiring, a broken bar, but, he added, choosing his words carefully, I've been doing this for over 20 years. I've never seen signals like this. We are legally obligated to report IDA not just to the building department, but to higher authorities. My heart started to pound. I turned to look out the window again. Carol was standing in her backyard, staring at the survey team. Her skin had gone ghost pale, her hands visibly trembling. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked truly frightened. Not angry, not defensive, afraid. Her fear deepened when the surveyor posted the official notice on her door later that afternoon. She had 48 hours to comply with a city inspection or face criminal charges. What followed was like watching someone's world slowly implode. That night, I noticed a moving truck, a small and clearly rented, pulling up in front of Carol's house. She began hauling things out of the shed, alone, under cover of darkness, refusing help. Her movements were frantic, desperate. More than a few neighbors were watching from their own windows now, murmuring theories in text threads and group chats. And then everything unraveled. During one of her late-night efforts, Carol attempted to move something large, an ornate garden statue of some sort. She struggled with the weight, stumbled, and dropped it. The sound of shattering stone echoed down the block. Porch lights flicked on, doors opened, and Mrs. Peterson from across the street came rushing outside. She gasped, falling to her knees beside the fragment. That's my mother's Ganesh statue, she cried. It was a wedding gift from Mumbai worth over $5,000. Carol mumbled something about a garage sale, but Mrs. Peterson wasn't listening. She cradled a broken shard in her hands, tears streaming down her face. This crack, she whispered, pointing at a small fissure repaired with gold leaf. I broke it when I was 7. My mom fixed it. This is mine. Within minutes, she had posted a photo on the neighborhood page. The response was instantaneous and brutal. My garden gnome vanished last Friday. A broken bar, our carved nativity set, disappeared after we reported her for noisy. Broken bar. My father's memorial stone was stolen from our yard. Post after post poured in. Stories, photos, accusations. Neighbors began gathering outside, drawn by the noisy and the unfolding online chaos. A few tried to defend her. There must be a misunderstanding. Carol's always been so dedicated to broken bar, but even the loyalists sounded uncertain. The sheer number of coincidences was too much to ignore. And then someone made the connection. All of these things disappeared after people got fined. That's when the tipping point hit. It all unraveled when Bob from 2 streets over stepped into the crowd. Carol, he said, his voice tight with rage, 3 months ago, You told me to cut back on watering my lawn. Said we had to conserve water, so I did. The grass turned brown and you fined me $300 for a negligent lawn care." He paused, his face twisting. "That same week, my daughter's ceramic duck went missing. The one she made in kindergarten. Are you seriously going to stand there and say that's just a coincidence?" By then, Carol had already locked herself inside her house. But she made the fatal mistake of trying to salvage control the only way she knew how, by live streaming. "This is a witch hunt," she told her phone's camera, her voice trembling. "A mob, stirred up by that man with the dangerous dogs. I've done nothing but maintain standards in this neighborhood." But the comment section told a different story. One after another, residents began chiming in stories of beloved items that vanished after crossing Carol or receiving fines. Holiday displays, lawn D8 copyright core, heirlooms. The pattern was undeniable. The fear that had kept them quiet for years was finally crumbling under the weight of their shared experiences. By the second night of the 48-hour countdown, the neighborhood was fully awake. Kids were making Team Finn signs after hearing how my dog had sensed something was off from the very beginning. People brought him treats, posed for pictures with him. Finn, ever the gentle giant, soaked in the attention, a tail wagging softly but never stopped growling when he glanced toward Carol's property. Carol's lawyer dropped her once the extent of the allegations surfaced. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and formally distanced themselves. She wasn't the president anymore. She was a pariah, an isolated dictator watching her empire collapse. The night before the inspection was deathly quiet. No more moving trucks, no more light from her house. The stillness was unnerving. I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., Finn began to whimper at the window. I followed his gaze and froze. The shed door was wide open, swaying slightly in the breeze. But Finn wasn't focused on the shed itself. He was fixated on the ground beside it, where a fresh patch of concrete gleamed under the moonlight. About 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, still damp enough to show texture, and in the corner clear as dia was what looked like a handprint. My phone buzzed. "Unknown number, check your email." The subject line made my blood run cold. Security footage. A 2019 A weren't her first problem. The attached videos were grainy, but unmistakable. The first clip showed Carol in someone's backyard, placing something into a dog's food bowl. The timestamp, 3 days before the Hendersons' German Shepherd, Bruno, fell mysteriously ill. The second video showed her walking a large dog away on a leash. Bruno, trusting, followed without hesitation. The final image was a screenshot of a text message. "Problem solved. Henderson dog won't be barking anymore." I immediately forwarded everything to Deputy Miller and backed it up 6 different ways. That patch of concrete outside wasn't just suspicious, it was a possible grave. And the shed? I no longer believed it just held stolen gnomes and stolen ducks. As the sun rose, I braced myself for whatever came next, because whatever was buried in Carol's backyard, a broken bar, wasn't going to stay hidden for long. Want to know what the officials found when they finally opened that shed? Stick around, because the moment they walked in, this went from neighborhood drama to federal investigation. The map in the filing cabinet was labeled A through F. Location C was circled with coordinates pointing to a wooded area just outside of town. That's when the social worker, who had been quietly observing up until now, finally spoke. "We need to check those locations." All of them. Carol watched the scene unfold with a twisted mix of disbelief, furia and something disturbingly close to pride. When Deputy Miller moved in to arrest her, she snapped, "You don't get it." She screamed. This neighborhood was chaos before me. Grass at different heights, cars parked all crooked, dogs barking at all hours. So I brought order. I brought standards. She flung her arm toward the shed. These items, they were wasted on people who didn't appreciate them. I gave them the respect they deserved. Silence. The entire neighborhood watched her meltdown in real time. Carol's eyes were wild now, her voice rising with manic intensity. "The Hendersons thought they could challenge me? Me? I've been maintaining this community since before any of you even cared what it looked like. That dog barked at 7 in the morning. 7. She was unraveling fast, completely unaware she was confessing to multiple crimes in front of a crowd and a camera. "And all of you," she pointed wildly at the neighbors around here, "you, with your mismatched flower pots. You, with your tacky Christmas inflatables. You, letting your kids draw chalk on the sidewalks. I was saving this neighborhood from turning into a dump. Deputy Miller calmly read her rights and placed her in handcuffs. She laughed, loud and cold, the kind of laugh that makes you take a step back. You'll see, she hissed as they led her away. In 6 months this place will be a trailer park, property values will crash, and you'll beg for someone like me to come back. What followed was nothing short of astonishing. The investigation revealed the full, horrifying extent of Carol's crimes. The coordinates from her problem map led to the remains of 6 pets, each one traced back to families who had dared challenge her reign. That alone was enough to trigger a federal investigation. Turns out, Carol had been selling many of the stolen items online across state lines. That brought in the feds. Her laptop was a goldmine of damning evidence. Thousands of surveillance photos taken without consent, detailed plans for forcing problem residents out, and HOA financial records exposing years of embezzlement. As for the concrete slab near the shed, it hid a makeshift underground vault filled with stolen valuables. No bodies, thank God. But what they did find was enough to lock her up for a very long time. That evening, the entire neighborhood gathered for an impromptu street celebration. People brought back items they discovered were stolen. Hugs and apologies were exchanged. Mrs. Peterson cooked a massive Indian feast to honor the return of her mother's Ganesh statue. Bob organized a fund to help families who had been driven away. George, he stood in his front yard, polishing his mother's silver cross with tears in his eyes. She kept it polished, he whispered when I approached. 3 years in that shit a broken bar and she kept it polished. I had no answer. Carol was clearly disturbed in ways we hadn't fully understood, but as I looked around at my neighbors talking, laughing, kids playing freely in the street, I realized something important. We didn't need tyrannical rules to make this a good neighborhood. We just needed to care about each other. Finn, the true hero of the day, basked in love and attention. Kids brought him treats. Neighbors posed for selfies. He accepted it all with his usual calm dignity, tail wagging a butt still growled if he saw Carol's old house. Even Cersei roused herself to enjoy a few well-earned belly rubs. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I overheard someone say, "Who knew it'd take a dog to save us from ourselves?" 3 months later, we threw the first Freedom from HOA Tyranny barbecue. George had been unanimously elected the new HOA president. His first act? Replacing the 60-page HOA bylaws with a single, glorious page. Rule number 1. Don't be a jerk. Rule number 2. See rule number 1. That was it. Carol, she's serving a 2-year sentence in federal prison, plus 500 hours of community service. Ironically, at the county animal shelter, her home was seized and sold. The proceeds going to restitution for her victims. But the story isn't over. Federal investigators discovered she was part of an online network of rogue HOA residences swapping tactics on how to control residents through fines, surveillance, and intimidation. Meanwhile, Finn was made an honorary deputy by Deputy Miller. He even got a little badge for his collar. The kids painted a mural of him on the side of the community center. It reads, "Finn, the dog who saved our neighborhood." As I sat at the barbecue, watching laughter replace fear, I turned to Finn. "What do you think, buddy?" "Mission accomplished." He let out a quiet huff, glanced at the new family moving into Carol's old Housey broken bar and flopped over with a deep, satisfied sigh. I laughed. "Yeah, me too." And for the first time in a long time, a broken bar, we had peace. Oh, and that concrete vault? It led to 3 more arrests in other states. When the federal case closes, I'll be able to share the rest. Subscribe and hit the bell, you won't want to miss what we found next. And yes, Finn is doing amazing. Drop a FY 3/4 in the comments for our hero dog.